and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. My name is Daryl Grove and I'm not joined by Taylor Rockwell today. Instead, I'll be talking to Jason Davis. You probably know who Jason is, or at least you should do. He's a long-time soccer writer and broadcaster who currently hosts the United States of Soccer show on Sirius XM FC. Jason and I actually started soccer podcasting around the same time. I think he was actually a little earlier than me, with the first Match Fit USA podcast being early 2009, the first TSS more like the summer of 2009. I've always enjoyed and admired Jason's work rate and commitment. He has a much more talk radio style than Taylor or I, but that's actually what I like about his shows. There's the energy of classic talk radio, but with way more substance and way more respect for his guests. And he makes a great guest himself because he always brings energy and opinions. No dead air, ever. So in this episode, I basically talk shop with Jason. We talk soccer broadcasting, the state of soccer media, Jason's philosophy and approach to what he does. I mean, if you're looking for tips on how to interview people, we get into that. If you're looking for reflections on the state of soccer fandom in the United States, we get into that. And if you want to hear how and why Jason started supporting Tottenham Hotspur recently, we get into that too. I'll be back in studio with Taylor tomorrow, and we'll be joined by Matt Herman of the Talking Football podcast to do our combined very specific predictions for the upcoming Bundesliga season. Until then, I hope you enjoy my chat with Jason. I know I did. So on the other end of this phone line, but talking into a microphone, I assume, it's the soccer eagle himself, Jason Davis. Hello. How you doing?
Hi, Daryl. I'm good. Thank you for having me. And yes, thank you for referencing my nom de plume in soccer. Absolutely.
So I'm going to assume that is not a name you gave yourself. I'm hoping it's something that maybe listeners gave you on the American Soccer Show. United States of Soccer. I'm sorry, United States of Soccer.
That's okay. The United States of Soccer. Yes, it is indeed. I was bestowed that name by a caller at one point. It's been a year or so now, maybe. I think it was I can do in a moderately okay manner the sort of granular stuff that you and Taylor do so well, and looking at a game and breaking it down. You guys are miles beyond where I am, but I can do that to an extent.
But no one's going to call us the soccer eagle for that.
Well, no, but exactly.
The bookworms would be the bookworms, I think.
I tend to be big picture. I tend to be a big narrative guy, and I don't mean like manipulated narratives. I just mean I look for, I kind of have my eye on a broad scope of things.
Oh, I see. So it's not just about like patriotism. It's more about like that 30,000 foot view or however high eagles fly.
That's the way I took it. When the caller, when the guy called in and said, "Yeah, you're the soccer eagle. You have this big view of things," I was like, "That's exactly how I feel about my perspective." So yeah, if it was only about rah rah USA, I'm not sure I would be doing it. I don't think I would as unironically own it the way that I do sometimes.
It's in your Twitter handle, right? It's two emojis.
It is.
I love it.
I mean, we get and from doing this for as long as you have, Daryl, we have to latch on to those things that make our personalities and our shows, unique and stand out. I mean, there are lots of soccer podcasts and shows in the world, sports and everything else. If you have something that people can identify you with, then that's something you have to. I mean, until I'm gonna mine that vein until there's nothing left.
Well, I think of it as, I guess we're getting into sort of talking shop here, which is kind of what I wanted to do, so this is great.
Okay.
But I think of it as, if your listeners give you that stuff, then you'd be crazy not to fold it into your show, because that's how your show then changes and advances and develops different themes. Otherwise, you're just stuck doing the same thing over and over again, right? It's like an organic change that comes from your listeners, and that's why I think that stuff is absolute gold.
It's the community building part of it too. It's the we're in this together. We're a group of people, like-minded individuals who share in this thing, whether it's us behind the microphones or people listening. You want to create that camaraderie. It's just like a sports team. You got to have you have to want to play for the guy next to you. But if you're listening to your favorite soccer podcast, you want to feel as though you're part of the conversation, even if you're not always talking back to them. And I think that it's inside jokes, it's references, it's going back to the history of the show and being self-referential. I think those things are important.
Do you ever worry about the balance? I'm always scared of getting, because we get kind of in-jokey sometimes on Total Soccer Show, and then I worry, like, if this is someone's first show, are they going to feel left out, or are they going to feel motivated to try and figure out what all this means? Like, I always feel like there's a certain balance you have to keep, right, to not make it impenetrable.
Yeah, I think I'm overly conscious of those things sometimes, and I think that I kind of ruin the fun a bit by going by explaining the joke too often.
Right.
But I think we have to give most people credit that they recognize what those things are, even if they're buying in for the first time.
Yeah.
They can say, okay, well, that's something I don't know. Excuse me. And either they'll go back and try to educate themselves about why that reference came up, or why that individual was called that name, or that specific thing that, they'll go back and they'll do it, or they'll just go along for the ride, recognize that they'll have to kind of pick up along the way. I mean, not everybody goes back to the beginning of The Simpsons, Daryl, but we all, that's 1989. Who's that old anymore? But we all, you can jump into The Simpsons and still enjoy every moment and understand that those jokes are part of the universe, even if you don't know the origins of them. I think it's, you know what? Let me turn this to football clubs. It's the same thing. You can pick up a club. I know we're going to talk about my decision of who to follow in the Premier League this year. You can pick up a club that you have no knowledge of, choose to support them, and then go through that process. Whether you want to read about 80-year-old history or not, there's a process to becoming a fan of anything that sort of leaves behind certain elements while choosing to pick up other things.
All right, let's talk about that then, because I saw a tweet yesterday that you said in the last 10 seconds of Monday's show, you announced that you're going to be following Spurs this season in the Premier League. So
I did say that.
I guess my first question is, did you get any feedback on that on this morning's show?
I didn't, because I didn't reference it directly. I chose to kind of leave it there. Here's my conundrum with this. Okay, and my past is of it being the host of a show that was internationally focused with Soccer Morning, and I got a chance to talk about Mexico and England and Germany and Spain and Holland, and it was great. And we had guests from all over the world. I always thought I was more of again the cruise director, and we brought the experts on to educate us about these individual leagues and clubs. I wasn't going to be the one dispensing that knowledge, but it gave me an anchor in certain places, and I you have to choose. It's the world's huge when it comes to this sport. You can't follow every league, and I do watch the Premier League. I choose to watch the Premier League, but I've never
It's hard to avoid it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's so great to be able to turn on the game on a Saturday morning. I mean, who wouldn't want to do that? And I first sort of fell in love. I found my passion for the game again through the Premier League. I mean, that's my origin story. It goes back. I
assumed it was MLS. I just assumed that's sort of what you were into.
It sort of was flipping around the channels, finding a game on cable, whatever it was, Fox Sports World or whatever it was back then, sort of becoming intoxicated by the atmosphere, diving deep into the game again and sort of going, well, why don't we have more of that here? Or how do we get that here? And then my sort of latent American rah-rah thing coming to the surface. And I never stopped watching the Premier League, but my desire to see American soccer grow and thrive sort of overwhelmed any interest that I had in becoming a hardcore Premier League or club fan of English football.
I see. So what changed is my question then. What changed this year that made you think, all right, Spurs, that's the team for me this year?
Okay, here's what, and this is what I mean by my conundrum. So my show is 2 hours of American soccer, and I tried to keep that as wide a perspective as possible. Again, going back to the Soccer Eagle thing a little bit, I want to focus on MLS and USL and NESL and the national team and development of players and NWSL and all those things that are purely and without a doubt American.
Yeah, like today was D2 and the Open Cup, right?
Yeah, we talked Open Cup. We talked to Jake Edwards, who's the president of USL. I like doing that stuff.
My compatriot.
There you go. I don't think that there's enough focus on those things, and I like being an outlet for that. I recognize that that's not everybody's cup of tea, or that I recognize the audiences for those things may be fairly small, but we need to talk about them, otherwise they never grow. So,
true.
My show is 2 hours of American soccer, and again, I try to keep that as broad as possible, and I within that theme, I make sure to allow for, hey, part of being an American soccer fan isn't just supporting MLS or NASL or USL or the national team for that matter. Part of being an American soccer fan means getting up on Saturday morning, and whether you are actively watching or just passively watching, turning on the Premier League because it's there, because it's ubiquitous, the American soccer fan experience is not just local and domestic. It also is going to the pub on Saturday morning. It is identify. So many people have chosen teams for various reasons, and I figured because my employer, Sirius XM FC, broadcasts Premier League games, because it's a major part of the American soccer experience, even if it's not the central part of my American soccer experience, that I should make an effort to follow a club this year. And I'm not saying I'm a diehard Spurs fan today. That's not what's happening here.
You're not covered in Spurs tattoos, cockerel tattoos all of a sudden.
No cockerel tattoo. But again, the badge is part of the reason that I chose Spurs. I do like their badge. I'll say that my decision to buy in a little bit deeper this year is hard for me because I'm the guy who always wanted the club to choose me, and it just hasn't happened. And I think that's partly because I've been so American focused.
Yeah.
That I haven't allowed myself to sort of say, okay, well, during the full America years, I'm a Fulham fan, or during Howard and Donovan at Everton, I'm an Everton fan, which is an easy connection for an American to make.
But it's passing, right? It fades away if they leave.
Yeah, well, I think there are a lot of hardcore Fulham fans. That are still Fulham fans who bought in during the Dempsey and Bocanegra years and Casey Keller and all of those things. And that's good for them. I didn't know if that was going to happen for me. I was more interested in the individuals. I never felt like I was tied to the club. And I don't know if Spurs is going to grab me that way, but I'm going to give it a chance because I think that if I choose to care a little bit more about that club as opposed to the other 19, then maybe something will spark there. Maybe I'll give myself a chance. And I don't know that I have to become a fan of any particular club. There's no law that says I can't just watch the Premier League as a general soccer fan.
That's what I do when Wolves aren't there, which is most of the time.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing is you have a club that their Premier League presence is intermittent at best. So you can't just pass. You're not just going to pass off your Wolves fandom and then choose to follow a club in the league. So it's interesting. It's just
Actually,
it's an interesting experiment.
I have a friend here in town, Pavlas, who is a Huddersfield fan. He's from Huddersfield, and he's he's a diehard Huddersfield Town fan. But he's also a Manchester United fan because Huddersfield were a lower division team, so he just felt like there was a good separation between them. And now his two teams are number 1 and 2 in the Premier League. So I don't know how he's going to handle that, but that stuff can happen.
Let's hope that lasts for quite some time. Number 1 and number 2, Huddersfield Town in the top 2 of the Premier League. That's going to be tough. And I do think that's...
he's real happy.
Well, okay, he gets the best of both worlds then. But I think that a lot of fans, and I don't know how you feel about it, Daryl. I mean, you seem like a live and let live kind of guy. a lot of soccer fans, and I think a lot of overly sensitive or overly concerned American soccer fans will call that stuff out. Oh, you can't be a fan of 2 clubs. Like, you can't support 2 clubs. That's not how this works. You have to be committed. And I knew as soon as I threw out my whatever we're calling this,
Spursiness, your newfound Spursiness,
my newfound Spursiness, that I was going to have a reaction, that I was going to get people either it was a lot of welcome to this, please buy some Pepto-Bismol, you're going to need it kind of stuff. And I had one person said, because my logic went like this. I like the badge. I like Pochettino. I like Harry Kane. Yeah. And I didn't want to pick one of the big clubs that are one of the traditional big 4 for sure.
I see.
But I wanted to pick a club that I thought maybe had a chance to win something. Maybe not this year, maybe next year, maybe 5 years from now. And I think that if you're a Huddersfield Town fan, you kind of know where your life is going to end at the end of the season. Your season's going to end. Barring Leicester and the Miracle. Yeah. There aren't a lot of clubs like that. That middle ground of improving or occasionally good enough to challenge for a Champions League spot, but not a United or Chelsea or City with the bucket loads of cash. So
it's the excitement of the unknown, essentially.
Right, yeah, and I figured Spurs was kind of a nice compromise there. And it immediately got from somebody, oh, you picked Spurs because you thought they could win something? Ha, 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 ha.
So I want to hit on the thing you mentioned about people saying you can't have 2 teams or that sort of like laws of fandom type stuff, because we get those questions sent to us at Total Soccer Show quite a lot. And I want to run a theory past you, which is I think the people trying to enforce those like laws are the people who are kind of insecure about their own fandom and are trying to prove something to someone about how their soccer fandom is real. Do you know what I'm saying?
I believe that. Yeah, I think that's 100% accurate. I think for the most part, and it's not just soccer, but obviously I think the way that the game has grown here and the number of Americans who have attached themselves to clubs of domestic or foreign vintage, they are anxious to prove themselves. I think in general, Daryl, American soccer fans have a massive inferiority complex, and I think that when we talk about latching on, and this goes back to sort of learning the history, I think what's interesting to see is those newfound Premier League club fans, even in the last 10 years, which is relatively recent, who are experts on every single moment of a club's history because they felt they had to go and get that information in order to prove their fandom. I think you're right about that.
And they'll probably end up knowing more than locally based fans who kind of just take the history for granted and don't feel the pressure to go back and learn about what happened in the 50s and 60s. So they end up sort of overstudying for the exam, sort of.
Yeah, exactly. I think you'll hear. Look, and for obviously for you growing up in England, and for anybody who comes from that part of the world or comes from a part of the world where the game is ubiquitous. There's no question of its growth or its popularity. The clubs are 100 years old in most cases. It's like us with American football or with baseball. You're just a fan. You're just a fan. It's a low pressure enterprise to be a fan of a sport that you've grown up with your entire life. But when you're trying to get into what you to view as somebody else's world, and I think you'll hear pretty regularly. You'll hear especially English writers and football pundits say, Americans, the ones that are into the game, they know so much. They're so educated. That's exactly why it's that phenomenon of trying to prove themselves.
And I'll say, for me, it's the reason I enjoy sort of following soccer here more than back home, because it tends to attract the people who go super deep and want to have more serious conversations, as opposed to serious, not serious, but both. As opposed to just, he sucks, he's good, he sucks, which is kind of what happens in England sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I only have one perspective on that, and I think that it's a double-edged sword, but I think there's probably more good than bad with it, and I do think it's accelerating. It's accelerating the growth of the game in the sense that we have. When those serious discussions are happening, that means people are becoming more knowledgeable about the ins and outs of how the sport is played, rather than just, as you said, and look, we obviously are dealing with a history here in the U.S. where an undereducated coaching class sort of slowed down the development of our players, or perhaps didn't allow for the best possible environments because it was run fast, kick the ball hard, be strong kind of things. And as we grow, and as people dive in, and I probably know, of my soccer fan friends, I probably know more that have read, Inverting the Pyramid than haven't. Right. Then we're going to get better, and hopefully at teaching our kids. And then, who knows? I mean, whether or not the end game is win a World Cup and have the best league, I'm not so sure. But if that's what people want, then we need that knowledge.
So that brings us to the second thing I want to talk about, which is the growth or otherwise of soccer media. Because when I introduced you at the top of the show, this wasn't deliberate. I accidentally said the American Soccer Show.
You did.
Which I think was the name of your original podcast with Jared, right?
So I think we've talked about, I don't know. Anyway, the original podcast I did was named after my blog, which was Match Fit USA.
Okay.
Then quickly moved into the American Soccer Show, which I actually did with Zach Woosley for a while.
Oh, yes, of course. I'm sorry.
Well, no, I mean, it's ancient history, even though it's not. Yeah. It's ancient history by soccer media standards.
It'll be written in the books and placed in the Citadel for the Meisters to take care of.
There it is. Absolutely. Yeah. So American Soccer Show. Yeah, that's an old name. That's with an unfortunate acronym, which, by the way, Jimmy Conrad actually picked up that name. Not he wasn't stealing it. We weren't using it. It wasn't. But Jimmy Conrad had a thing for a little while that he called the American Soccer Show.
And I feel like he did it deliberately because he put ass in big letters on the front.
I think he was owning the acronym in a way we never did. Absolutely.
Well, the reason I brought that up was not to talk about Jimmy Conrad's ass. It was to talk about just the idea that you've been in this soccer media game a long time. You and I have talked on and off, right? And we've emailed back and forth a few times. And I kind of think of us as almost old warriors in this game that's been going on for a long time. So I want to sort of get your feel on, are things better now than they were back then? Because there was the Deadspin article yesterday, which I know got your attention because I saw you tweeting about it, about how they felt SB Nation was exploiting writers. Yeah. There's the news that we all got this morning that one of our favourite writers, Will Parchman, is no longer going to write about soccer. He's going to move on and just do something completely different. And that's not rare, right? There've been some other soccer writers who've dropped out recently. Yeah. So I kind of want to get a feel for what you think of the soccer media landscape now versus then, and where you think we might be headed. Well, I think big questions, right? Big questions.
Yeah, no, these are big picture. I think about this stuff all the time.
You're a soccer eagle, right? You should be soaring above all this.
It is.
Out. Yeah.
I mean, not only is it a part of our soccer culture, and a major part. I mean, how we discuss and where we go to read about and learn about, and these things. Again, you sort of take a punditry class for granted in England. There's this group of individuals. This is what they do. They're on my television every weekend or every, and in American football or basketball or baseball, it's the same thing. These people and the sort of military industrial complex that exists to support these sports is legitimate, and it's big. And look, there are always people trying to get on the ground floor, but it supports a lot of people, and there's livelihoods that can be made there.
Yes.
American soccer is still in a place where, and you said it's better, or maybe you asked if it was better. I think it is better in the sense that there is more access to the information for fans, which is really, that's the point. However, it hasn't meant an explosion of individuals being able to make a living doing this. It has meant that everybody, yourself included, myself, that has managed to even become quote unquote professional or do something like this even pseudo full time has had to carve out we've had to go dig for every little bit that we could. We've had to be creative about the revenue streams that we bring in because it's not there, because it's not there is. And again, this is media in general though. And I think it's important that people recognize that what we're seeing in soccer is just a function of what's happening in general sports media and general journalism to the extent that because the mediums have been democratized to the point that anybody can write anything and put it up on the internet, there's less, there's obviously fewer dollars to go around. Newspapers are shutting down or cutting back, and even in the internet world, there's just not as much imperative to staff people full time and do all of those things. And because of the business side, there's not enough jobs.
I had that realization when Fox Sports website switched to video, right? Just got rid of all the written content and switched to video. And I think I found out about it through, is it Ryan Rosenblatt on Twitter?
Yeah.
He was saying, I'm no longer there. And I was like, they've let all the soccer people go. And I went and looked at the site. And then I slowly had this realization oh, no, they've let all the sports writers go. It's not just soccer. It's the entire landscape. And it's this, quote, pivot to video. That it's affected everybody, not just the soccer people. So, I guess soccer's just part of the bigger landscape that's equally in trouble.
It is. And that's odd because, again, I was talking about this today with this dichotomy that is our intent in this country to grow the U.S. Open Cup, while at the same time, very slowly, and I don't think it's dramatic, the FA Cup diminishes in importance from year to year. And so American soccer is on the rise as some of these other things are sort of changing abroad or changing in other parts of the culture, right? So American soccer is on the rise. We would think that our media should grow dramatically and more people should be able to get paid and there should be more opportunity, while at the same time journalism contracts and changes and the business models are shifting at all moments and nobody's getting paid anymore. And it's all gig economy stuff where, this is my livelihood, Daryl. I make a good amount of money on the radio, not enough to live on. And I go and I cobble together the rest of my living through writing pieces for ESPN and U.S. soccer players and whoever else I can pick up, because there's not a full-time job for me in that world. And it's just, I'm not unique and I'm not moaning about it. I'm happy to be able to do what I do, but it does speak to the ceiling on all of this. We are sort of butting up against the ceiling. And when a guy like Will Parchman decides that he can't have the family life he wants, he can't support his family the way he wants to in soccer, and being as good of a writer as he is, because you would hope that the talent and the cream rises to the top and those people get recognized and those people get the jobs, then it is troubling at the very least. And I think that we are at a point now where writers overvalue writing, which I'm a writer. I do it too. We want to believe, and this is the reaction to the Fox Sports whacking and ESPN losing all, dumping a bunch of guys, and Doug McIntyre right now. I mean, that's insane that Doug McIntyre's not working. We at the same time we want to value writing the way it was valued 20 or 30 years ago. That's not the way, and I'm not talking about monetarily. I just mean in terms of its cultural import.
Yeah.
And that clouds our thinking about shifting to whatever's the next thing. And while I think it's right to be cynical on some level about the pivot to video that Fox is doing or that anybody else is doing, Vice, another one, there is a truth to us needing to be more creative with how we deliver. And I know the word content gets thrown out too much, and I know that
I think it's hashtag content.
Yeah, it's hashtag content. And look, I think that it's easy for people who are writers and think of themselves as intellectuals, I don't know if that's the right word, to sort of downplay the importance of video or of people making YouTube videos or people making podcasts for that matter, although a podcast hasn't taken on the same sort of, I think, negative stigma that maybe video has in some cases. I mean, I think
because maybe I feel like there's deeper content in podcasts than in video, because the problem I have with video is that it tends to be like 2 minutes
short,
and there's not much there. Whereas like when your show was on Soccer Morning was video, it was at least like an hour or 2 hours of like deep content as opposed to just a flashy 2 minutes and then we're out. Yeah, with an ad playing before it.
Sure, I think you're right, and I don't like the 2-minute videos either. And I think that we have to find, and I'm working on this. This is a project I have, a company I'm starting. Who knows when we'll actually get on the air, because it's a long thing. If you want to, it's called Compass Football. I don't have a whole lot of detail other than to tell you that we're trying to bridge the gap. We're trying to say we're not going to be a couple of lads on a couch talking for 3 minutes about Manchester United transfers. We'll hopefully bring something that's a little bit more. I mean, polished isn't the right word, because those things are well produced. But I hope it's maybe it's 15 minutes, maybe it's 20 minutes, maybe it's half an hour of sort of whether it's entertainment and sort of comedic and humorous and taking on the big stories, or it's straight news, or it's just a review of the games of the weekend in any given league. I think I hope that there's a demand for that into a video format. Sort of taking the baton from podcasts, which you guys obviously fill a void. Hopefully my radio show does, even though it's behind a paywall, and giving people that stuff that television's not delivering them, because in American soccer television, there's just not enough time for them to really dive in. ESPN FC is a fine show, but they're also covering the entire world, and they can only do so much in half an hour. So hopefully because I think that the internet gives us the opportunity. So rather than go, oh my God, everything sucks and people are losing their jobs and nobody cares about writing anymore. Well, let's try to figure out what the next thing is. And if we can add a writing component, that's great. If I can I know there are knowledgeable, intelligent, well-versed, polished and personable people across the United States of America, just in the United States, who can speak on every notable league in the world, and in English in most cases, but there are also people who could probably do it in the native language of those countries. Yeah. So why wouldn't we give them the tools? Why wouldn't we want to say, here, look, it's really hard to make a living writing 4 or 5 pieces a week, scrambling for extra, emailing editors all day. I hate pitching. I get it.
I do too.
I understand. Like,
you have to do it, right? It's you either don't do it and don't get any work, or you do it and just sort of grit your teeth and just go for it.
Yeah, it's the worst part of the worst part of the job. And if people want to continue to do that, fine. But they're also going to have downtime, and they're also going to have, rather than go work at the coffee shop when you're not writing or pitching. Hey, how about we give you the tools to make a 15-minute show about Liga MX in English, because we know that audience exists and we know they're underserved. And hopefully those things help create a new sort of American soccer media. And this idea that I have, or that me and my partner have, and it was really his first, is kind of expandable to all sorts of areas, not just football, not just soccer. but we're starting here because this is what we love and this is what we know. And I think that there's a possibility of creating an entirely new, not just with one company, hopefully with more, new sort of media infrastructure that does recognize that there's been a shift. And even if you're not corporate and spending $1 billion on everything, and we don't have rights fees, so that gives us some mobility, some maneuverability within the market, then we can still do something cool because the internet gives you the access to do it, right?
Yeah.
Because you shouldn't have to be tied to a television. And since the internet's been delivering us excellent soccer content in a written format for the last 15 years, 20 years, why not try to figure that out in a more accessible way with video? I hope.
So now you've got me excited for Compass Football.
Okay, well that's good. Let's just be patient because we're still trying to figure out, the bells and the whistles and all of the things that make a video, because you can't put something on that looks bad because people won't watch it and they won't come back. So that's the challenge. And it's the same thing with a podcast, right? You can open up a microphone and talk into it for an hour, but if you don't know what you're going to talk about, if you don't have people that can add to your discussion, if you haven't done the research, and I know you guys research a ton, it's just people babbling for an hour. Yeah. And that may get some people, but I think you're limiting yourself. So hopefully that's what's coming next.
Well, that leads us to the final thing I want to talk about, which is the Sirius XM FC show.
Okay.
I want to sort of talk about, like, I said at the start of the show that I assume talking to me through a microphone. Am I right in thinking that you have sort of basically a home studio where you do the show from?
Yes.
Or a local studio?
Yeah, it's essentially the same thing I've been using to do podcasts for the past 8 years. It's just that I put a different piece of software on my desktop and it connects me to the Sirius XM people in the studio in DC, and then it gets beamed up to the satellite, and there we go.
All right. And then, so you mentioned preparation. I'm assuming like you or a producer book guests in advance, and then you sort of go research ready to talk to those people.
Yes. That's one of the benefits of being actually on a radio station is that producers will do all that booking work for you.
Yeah.
It's very much like pitching. It's something I never liked doing very much, Daryl. So, it's mainly, usually it's, we want to live in the moment. So it's what happened today that we didn't cover or that we know is coming. There's a game tonight. Okay, let's get a player or the coach or the president or whoever for that particular subject matter. I'll pitch it out to I'll ask my producer if that's a good guest to go after, and he'll say, well, yeah, we can get that guy. And next,
so you contract out you farm out the guest booking to the producer. That's great. You can sort of think, I want to talk to this person, and you see if they can go do it.
Yes. And you know what? Look, part of that is, and this is what's interesting about being on the radio side versus having done a podcast myself for so long, is that, that's sort of built into the radio thing, that a producer of a radio show will push the buttons to get you on the air and will tell you how many seconds you have until the ad break, but he's also going to book the show for you. And producers who have a history, specifically in a given sport or in a given area, they're worth their weight in gold because they have a Rolodex. I mean, not a literal Rolodex, but they have contacts all over the country, and not just individuals to come on the air, but the PR people who know that person, who know that person, who know that person, that gets you to, and they're willing to dig into all of, they're willing to chase I heard this guy might know Joe, so let me see if he'll get Joe on the air for us, that kind of stuff.
All right, and then I also want to ask you about your interview technique, because it occurs to me that you probably have done more soccer interviews than anyone in the United States. If you think that, say, Soccer Morning was like 3 or 4 interviews per show, right? And the same again with the new show. So when you total all those up, I imagine it's a number that we can't even put together, but it's big, right?
Yeah, so, I stopped trying to count a long time ago.
I wondered if, even if I know some other podcasters might listen to this show. So do you have any tips for them in terms of interview technique, like any golden rules that you go by, or any sort of attitude that you take going into it?
I try to. Well, okay. I don't know that I have. If sat down and thought about it and these are the rules, maybe I could do that. I tend to be kind of open-minded to where the conversation is going to take you, right? So it's easy, and I think obviously when you first start, and I definitely did this, you write questions. You go, here's my 5 or 6 or 8 questions, depending on how much time I have with this guest. and I have to ask all of them. If you write, first of all, don't write a whole question. I never do that.
Right, in a full sentence kind of thing, because then you're the guy reading a sentence into a microphone off a piece of paper.
And you will find yourself having to, on the fly, change the scope of the question, or the guest has already answered that question. Yeah. And now, but there might be a way to branch off of that idea, but now you're stuck and it's in front of you. And I don't know, I'm visual. I respond to visual cues very, in a very, very rapid fashion, like almost like Anchorman. If you put it in front of me, I'm probably going to read it. So, I mean, at least in my head, internally, not out loud.
People of San Diego are very upset with you.
Yes, right. So I tend not to. So I never write full questions. I'll put topics, like I'll put 1 or 2 word themes, topics, areas, stadiums, expansion, loss to so and so, formation. Just things I know are pertinent to that guest and what we're going to talk about, so that I have, if he doesn't get to it, I have that topic to go to. If a guest asks a question and he gets to the end of the answer, you want to have something right off the bat. You want to be able to move it along, because airtime is precious. Maybe not as much in podcasts as it is in radio, but still, you don't want dead air. So, and I know you can edit, Daryl. I'm jealous about that. So you want to have something. Now, again, you also don't want to be so locked into your questions that you can't pick up on something he just said, or he or she just said, and then go with it. Oh, I didn't even think to ask them about that. Oh, let me use what they just said, and then piggyback on that to get either a different angle on it or to them to expound on it. Beyond that, I'm not sure that I have anything else that's really kind of a rule, because I really do think it's supposed to be a conversation. And not so, it can't be rote. It's going to feel like that. And you'll find that different interview subjects, like I talk too much, so Daryl has to deal with that. But sometimes you get people who don't talk, and you have to try to draw them out, and that's actually worse.
You don't talk too much, because I feel like the thing that you do that I like, which is obviously probably a result of you presenting so many shows, is that you don't do the thing where you talk in circles and end up saying the same thing 5 times in many different ways. Like as you talk, you're like moving through the points and onto the next thing, and there are lots of sort of conversational openings that present themselves as a result. So I only think someone talks too much if they just say the same thing repeatedly.
Okay, good. I'm going to try not to do that. So what were we saying? Go back and don't rifle send. Sorry.
And I can tell you, I've done exactly that for you. So I'm really, for this interview, glad that our techniques match up. I literally wrote on my piece of paper, Soccer Eagle, Soccer Media, and Sirius. Yeah. Those are like my 3 things I wanted to hit, and it's worked out, I think, kind of well.
Well, it's reps, right? I mean, you've interviewed a lot of people too, Daryl. It's completely about the number of the amount of time, the number. It's sort of like, I think of it as like flight hours. Like you're not able to fly a plane by yourself until you get a certain number of hours with the instructor, and then your hours kind of build towards your ability to do certain things in that world. You just have to, it's Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours. You have to do these things. I don't know if that's the exact number, but you have to do them over and over and over again, and you have to be. I mean, I don't get nervous anymore, obviously, because I've done so many of them. There's no point to it. But you have to make sure you're pushing past those things, because I think a lot of people are, if you're not sure, and then you suddenly, because you emailed the right person, you get to talk to Bob Bradley, you could get intimidated pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And not push the conversation. And I made sure that and actually that is one example where I was a little bit nervous. I had Bob Bradley on after he got announced as the LAFC head coach, and I had never talked to Bob Bradley before. Right. And Bob's got a rep as a certain kind of individual, and I made sure that I wasn't afraid to ask him things I knew were not completely comfortable. Like, Hey Bob, you come to LAFC, people say that you play a regressive style of soccer. What do you say? I have to ask that question. And he kind of gave me crap for it, but that's fine, because for me, that's fantastic radio. I would love for Bob Bradley to make fun of me for 15 minutes, because people are going to want to hear that. And you have to kind of just put your ego aside, make sure that you're asking questions that get people. And it's not. And obviously, Daryl, the other thing is, it's not about, when you're presenting and you have a guest, it's not about you. You want to make it about them. Yeah. So try. And I get caught sometimes, but try not to ask long questions either. Try to get to the point to let them speak.
Yeah, I've heard maybe too many questions that are sort of, not from you obviously, but from other people, questions that are sort of almost an attempt to convey that they have knowledge about a thing, and then and then a brief question on the end of it, like they're trying to impress someone and then have the question afterwards.
Yeah, I do this thing too, and I don't know if this is a crutch, and I don't know if it's bad. I tend to do this thing with assumed knowledge, where I will sort of say, I'll go into a question and go, well, obviously you did this, this, and this, or obviously you know about X.
Yeah.
And I think I do that because I want to make them comfortable that I know.
I see.
Why? You know what I'm saying? Like I'm trying to make that guest recognize that I'm not just they didn't come on the air. I know nothing about them, and I'm just asking questions. I want them to understand that I did. I know who they are. I know where they come from. I know what they do. Because I think it's important for people to feel as though they're valued if they're going to talk even moderately openly and honest about anything. But soccer in general, you gotta kind of say, okay, you're here and this is the reason you're here. Now, please tell us about that thing, because we want to hear about it, not just you happen to be a name that I have on my sheet, which right. I think too many people on radio do.
Yeah, it's more respectful to ask tougher questions, right? Because then you get to something
so,
deeper. Yeah. All right. Anything else you want to talk about, Jason? I should let you go because we're getting late in the afternoon here, and you've already talked for 2 hours this morning. So.
I did. It seems to be what I do. No, I mean, first of all, keep up what you and Taylor are doing is fantastic. I love that. And again, this is a sort of part of what we talked about with the soccer media. I think you and Taylor and what you're doing with Total Soccer Show, and I don't know what's going on with the Top Tour Soccer Show these days. Maybe we'll find out in the near future, but
it will continue. I'll say that.
Okay, that's great. That's great to know. I love the hustle, and it's obviously my roots are the same, and it's great. But honestly, I hope that we get to the point where your show and what you guys do has a bigger platform, and one that doesn't require you to kind of try to dig out all of these little bits of revenue and the like just to keep the thing going. We need to get that support system in place. I hope that happens.
Agree. Actually, my goal is 2018 World Cup. Like after that, I want to make it the only thing that I do. Sort of no more freelancing or any other stuff to sort of make up the difference. It's and it's it might not be achievable, but it's worth aiming for, right?
Absolutely.
To try for it.
And we need people, we need people to keep doing that. And as much as I respect Will Parchman's decision and he's doing the right thing for his family, when people say, how did you get to here? I say, I just didn't quit. And I think that that's a lot of this. Just don't, if you are listening to this, you're a podcaster, you're a writer, whatever. I'm not going to say don't quit if it gets really hard. I'm going to say sometimes you have to push through barriers you don't think you can to get to a point where maybe it's really legitimately your career.
On that note, Jason Davis, the Soccer Eagle, I will say thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Thank you very much.